I have been amazed at how partisan the Democrats have been in reaction to what President Trump did. By all measures, a pretty exciting, pretty dramatic move, and pretty successful. Now we don't know will the ceasefire hold? Who knows? But what we do know is that there has been bipartisan consensus for quite some time about Iran vis-a-vis Israel, vis-a-vis nuclear weapons, vis-a-vis ballistic missiles in the United States. And that bipartisan consensus, going all the way back, Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump, has been at its root that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, that Iran's threats to Israel, to the United States, to the West in general, was such that it was one of the top priorities of every president I've ever covered, that they need to make sure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon, particularly coupled with its development of ballistic missile technology. Even at a time of the extreme partisanship we've seen going back till before Bill Clinton, there has been bipartisan agreement. Israel is our ally. It's a close ally. Israel must be protected. That Israel is threatened by Iran because of its terrorism, because of its capabilities, but most of all, that Israel was threatened by the prospect of Iran having a nuclear weapon. And of course, Israeli prime ministers, Netanyahu and others, have always said that America must be a partner in dealing with this. When Barack Obama chose to deal with this threat, seen by every president since Bill Clinton, he chose to deal with it with an agreement. Now, there are people who say you can never make an agreement with Iran, and Donald Trump had been one of those people. He abrogated, he got rid of the Obama agreement, but he also started to negotiate with Iran and lead up to this armed conflict, and seemed at least open through Steve Witkoff, his emissary, open to the prospect of some sort of agreement, which critics said was pretty similar to where Obama ended up with his agreement. Now, some of those critics were Obama people who said, why did he get rid of an agreement only to head towards something similar? And some of the critics were from the right, who said, this is like the Obama agreement, and we can't have an agreement like that because it's not safe. Every president has worried about Iran. And no one, with the exception of Barack Obama with that deal, has done anything about it. Donald Trump did. Now, this deal, again, may not hold, but this was classic Trump. He said to the Iranians, make a deal or you will pay a price. Classic Trump, lots of coordination with Netanyahu. No one has reported that story out, and that's an incredible story that we'll see how long it stays a secret, but lots of coordination with the Israelis for a long period of time, not just during the operation of the last week. Donald Trump acted. He acted decisively, and he acted with a purpose. It wasn't to start a war. It wasn't to say, let's bomb Iran, cause regime change, send American forces in, build them schools and hospitals and roads, win over the hearts and minds of the Iranian people. That's not what he was trying to do. You cannot deny that what Donald Trump has done, knowing that we don't know the full consequences, was to solve a problem that has bedeviled the United States and Israel and the world for decades. That's pretty good, to solve a problem that the other presidents wanted to solve and couldn't. If you need a history lesson on Iran, you should know that the Iranians have said they're going to develop this capability and they're going to use it, and they're going to destroy Israel. And they have the capability to destroy lots of other places by taking their nuclear technology, marrying it up to their ballistic missile technology. This is not a joke. This is not a fight over whether Harvard should get a grant. And I'm not saying that's a joke, but this is a life and death, existential stakes. This is a big thing. If you ask every president since Clinton, what were the biggest things that worried you? What were the biggest responsibilities on your shoulders, heavy burden? I'm confident that they'd all list at the top or near the top Iran's capacity to have a nuclear weapon. Okay? Democrats in the last few days leading up to President Trump's military strike over the weekend, after his military strike, have been out of their minds in saying that Donald Trump wasn't adhering to the Constitution. Now, make no mistake, technically they're right. But we haven't had a president adhere to the Constitution on war powers since the War Powers Act passed. Because after Vietnam, the Congress said the president had too much power to make war. He wasn't adhering to the fact that war making is supposed to rest with the Congress. And so they passed the War Powers Act, and they tried to use the War Powers Act to restrain subsequent presidents. None of them have felt restrained in either party. And so part of why what Democrats are saying now in the wake of Donald Trump's use of military force without congressional authorization is, how dare he forgetting that they allowed Barack Obama to do it. Now, to their credit, there are some principled members of Congress in both parties who, regardless of whether the president's of their party or not, has said, no, they cannot act unilaterally. They must come to Congress if they're going to initiate hostile military actions. But it hasn't worked. They're not in the majority. They're not in the majority in Congress. They're not in the majority in the country. Partisanship. There's a phrase, partisanship should stop at the water's edge. That on matters of national security, people should have a higher bar for when they act in a partisan way. And unfortunately, whether you want to mark the beginning of the partisan era in which we are now, hyper-partisan, you want to mark it to the Robert Bork hearings during Reagan, you want to mark it to the way Democrats were treated when Bill Clinton was president by Republicans, you want to mark it to the rise of talk radio or cable news. But we have had for decades now a system where the incentives for the loudest and angriest voices is to dominate the national town square on both sides, because you get rich that way, you get power in Congress, you get followers on social media. It's a messed up process. And many people in my business and politics say, well, that's where we are. That's where we are. We're just going to be like that as a country. I haven't thought that. I haven't thought that since the Clinton era, when I was covering the White House and covering the Clinton administration, and said, well, it shouldn't be like this. Certainly we should have robust political discussions. Certainly it's not as bad as it was when we had an actual civil war. But for matters, for instance, of national security, when the president does something that pretty much everyone in politics and much the country agrees with, well, that should be applauded, shouldn't it? There was a brief moment like that after 9/11 when people rallied around President Bush 43. That didn't last very long. And so the examples abound, whether you're talking about foreign policy, national security, or domestic policy. Barack Obama deported a lot of people. The left didn't protest it very much. They called him deporter in chief behind his back. The right didn't celebrate it. There is something wrong with the country. They can't come together and rally around the president when he does something good. Okay. Barack Obama helped save the auto industry. Republicans criticized it. Okay. Now you have Donald Trump doing something historic, using boldly, judiciously, using force. Backlash was not very big. The markets didn't seem to mind it. The Europeans didn't seem to mind it. The Saudis didn't seem to mind it. Used force. Now, did he completely eliminate Iran's nuclear capability? Probably not. But he got them back to the negotiating table, and let us hope he's got them back to the negotiating table in a position of weakness. So here you have the decades of polarization, decades of the Democrats just reflexively criticizing the president. Barack Obama gets heat all the time for not endorsing the so-called Simpson-Bowles plan for deficit reduction. Republicans say, well, he's not serious because he didn't endorse it. He's not serious about reducing the deficit. Part of why he didn't endorse it, I'm told by people close to President Obama, is because if he'd endorsed it, it would have been the Obama plan, not the Simpson-Bowles plan. Goes from a bipartisan plan to a partisan plan, and it would never have passed. I'm not sure that's the only reason, but there's a lot to that. We live in this binary zero-sum world now in our politics, where if Donald Trump does it, for Democrats, it's bad. And by the way, if Donald Trump does it, for most Republicans, it's good. People made a big deal of the MAGA split in the run-up to President Trump's use of force. And they said, well, this shows the chaos and dissension. I prefer to say it shows that within MAGA, within the Republican Party, they're willing to have robust debates, that even some of the president's closest allies were willing to go in public and criticize him. And they weren't criticizing him for political gain in most cases, maybe some, but mostly they just thought he was wrong. They thought use of military force in this case was a bad idea, not in America's interest. That kind of robust debate between parties and within parties is fantastic. What's not fantastic is what we have now, where, again, if Donald Trump does it, it's bad. And again, it's the same when the shoe was on the other foot. When Joe Biden was in office, the right would say, well, if Biden's for it, it's a bad idea. So I've just watched these Democrats talk about what Biden did, and the thing of all in politics is when you're doing something that's both bad policy and bad politics. And I listen to even sensible Democrats, forget the ones on the far left whose Trump derangement syndrome is so strong that they're never going to say anything nice about Donald Trump. And again, there are some people on the left who have a principled objection, and there's no problem with that. But Democrats now, the mission's completed. He's got at least a temporary peace deal. And here you have some Democrats, even reasonable Democrats, refusing to say, bravo, Mr. President. I may not agree with you on everything, but bravo. They continue to argue something that, and this is where the bad politics comes in. They continue to say, well, he didn't follow the letter of the law. He didn't come to Congress and get permission.